Welcome to the channel. Today's explainer is going to hold up a mirror to your very existence, so get ready. Have you ever actually stopped to ask yourself why you were born in this exact form? I mean, why do you even have the cognitive ability to sit here and ponder your own existence right now?
Seriously, think about it for a second. Why weren't you born as a hungry stray dog, just scavenging for scraps in an alleyway? Why didn't your consciousness end up trapped in a life that's dictated entirely by the biological need to just find your next meal? Or why aren't you a bird? Sure, skipping rush hour traffic sounds pretty great, but what if your existence was completely devoid of deep thought? Or, and this is even more terrifying, why aren't you a tree, forced to literally stand silently in one exact spot for centuries on end?
So is it all just a random roll of the genetic dice? Well, ancient texts like the Ramcharitmanas suggest otherwise. They argue that human consciousness is this incredibly rare fortune, and it's guided by unseen rules. To really grasp what this means, let's follow the journey of someone who had to learn this the hard way.
Meet Akshay. Now on the outside, his reality was pretty much perfect. He had a loving family, a great education, a super secure future. Everyone called him lucky. But his inner reality was a totally different story. All of that outward perfection was just masking this paralyzing existential dread. He was constantly plagued by this one burning question: what is the actual purpose of my life?
One evening, while he was just sitting alone in a park as the sun was setting, Akshay had a series of encounters that completely shifted his perspective forever. First, he watched this scavenging dog, constantly getting shooed away but relentlessly returning to a pile of trash, driven by nothing but pure hunger. Then he watched a bird, just picking up seeds, living entirely in the present moment without a single care for tomorrow, or even a memory of yesterday. And finally, his eyes landed on an isolated old man, sitting there in utter silence, looking as though life had just completely passed him by.
Just watching them, Akshay was hit with this paralyzing emotional shift. He asked himself, wait, what if I were in their place? And he began to panic. He started wondering if his own life was meant to be just like theirs. Just this endless, repetitive loop of eating, working, studying, and then ultimately just fading into nothingness, exactly like that lonely old man. The sheer dread of living an empty existence absolutely terrified him.
That night, Akshay's dread manifested into a profound and, frankly, terrifying vision. In his dream, he found himself floating in a space of absolute darkness and deafening silence. Then, out of nowhere, a blinding light pierced the void, and this deep, incredibly authoritative voice echoed out. It asked him a question that shook his very consciousness. Akshay, are you ready to learn why you became human?
But the voice didn't just tell him the answer. It forced him to live it. In this really terrifying biological descent, Akshay actually felt his body shrinking, his vocal cords shifting. He was being violently pulled down the evolutionary ladder, stripped of his human awareness step by agonizing step.
First, he morphed into a street dog. Suddenly, he's down in this noisy, dirty alleyway. The human part of his brain was just gone, instantly replaced by a screaming, overwhelming hunger. He tried to eat from a trash pile, only to get hit by a rock. He wanted to yell out, "Hey, this isn't me, get me out of here." But all that came out was a desperate, pained bark. He felt the absolute helplessness of being trapped in a biological loop of just survival and pain. Then, just as the physical pain peaked, his awareness shifted again. Bam. Suddenly, he was a bird, soaring high up through the air. But that feeling of freedom, it was a terrifying illusion. He experienced the sheer horror of having absolutely zero cognitive purpose. He didn't know why he was flying or where he was even going. He was completely devoid of memory, operating purely on blind instinct, and entirely unable to even question his own existence. Finally, he was shoved into the ultimate claustrophobic existence, a tree. He was fully conscious, completely aware of the passage of time, but entirely stripped of mobility and agency. People would come by and break his branches. He felt every bit of it, but couldn't defend himself or run away. He was totally paralyzed, trapped in this wooden prison for what felt like centuries, just screaming silently inside. Suddenly, he was jolted right back to the silent void, gasping for air. Akshay demanded to know why he was being forced to see this, and the voice's answer completely shattered his reality. These are not just visions. These are your past forms. You have lived them all step by step.
Ancient texts like the Garuda and Padma Puranas talk about 84 Lakh Yonis, which translates to 8.4 million species. But as it turns out, they aren't just citing random massive numbers. They are mapping out a highly meticulous evolution of biological consciousness. It is, quite literally, the soul's curriculum. And this curriculum follows a very strict matrix of evolution. The journey begins in highly limited states, like aquatic life bounded by water, then moving to stationary plants rooted to the ground. It slowly, painstakingly progresses to insects, airborne birds, and land-bound animals. Every single birth is a necessary biological upgrade, slowly expanding your awareness until you finally achieve human consciousness. So the absolutely crucial takeaway here is this. Your human form is not your first life, and if you waste it, it might not be your last. You earned your spot here through the slow burn of evolutionary karma. Human existence is the absolute peak of evolutionary awareness. Unlike the dog or the bird or the tree, you possess the supreme consciousness to question, to learn, and to choose. It grants you the extraordinarily rare freedom to either rise higher spiritually or to fall right back down that biological ladder. Standing there in the void, it finally clicked for Akshay. His life wasn't just about his outward success. It wasn't about the degree, the nice house, or his bank account. His consciousness was a rare, hard-earned spiritual technology. His identity was an ancient, ongoing journey that extended way, way beyond the narrow confines of this one single lifetime. He finally grasped the monumental weight of the human opportunity. Which brings us right back around to you. It's wild to think about, isn't it? You have essentially won the cosmic lottery. You survived millions of iterations of consciousness just to be sitting exactly where you are today, engaging with this explainer with the incredibly rare ability to understand your own existence. So, the only question left to ask yourself is, what are you going to do with this awareness before your time runs out? You are human today, but for how long?